General manager of global price perception. So what is that?
Pricing plays such an important role in the e-commerce world. If we don't offer good prices to our consumers, eventually will consumers keep coming back to the platform and stay loyal.
Prime Video, you were the general manager there. What type of AI you were using there?
We tried to do generative AI before generative AI really happened. Is AI going to replace roles or is it going to supplement roles?
Another interesting fact about you at Amazon is how you helped the company expand into India by acquiring over 50 million active mobile users in 3 years.
What is interesting is you then start to focus a lot more on outcomes versus output. The outcome at the end of the day is, did I build a product that millions of consumers used and truly felt satisfied by it, versus did I say I launched X features and took them to market?
Lonely Planet, how was that experience for you?
I learned so much at Amazon about I'm so grateful that that's the school of product that I grew up in. But then at Lonely Planet, I think taught me a ton about emotional intelligence and about the value of people. How do you make content actionable? Content is really the king and it's the value of what you're giving the consumer. And product in some ways is the wrapper around the content that is then helping you understand how can all of this be actionable and used in a certain way.
Priyankka Mani, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carlos. Happy to be here.
There's so many things that I would love to learn from this conversation. See that you spent time at Google, Amazon, and most recently at Lonely Planet. So maybe we can start from the beginning. I see that your first job at Google wasn't actually in product. And then your first product job was at Amazon. So curious to learn more about how that transition happened.
Yeah, I feel like when I now look back at my journey, it feels unique in the way that it happened. I don't think it was premeditated or something that I planned, but I studied engineering, and so I was always connected to technology in some way or the other. But after engineering, I actually got started in the advertising space. And, I used to think deeply about advertising and technology and how that all comes together in the digital world, which then led me to my job post business school at Google. And at Google, I worked with advertising agencies, and I would work with like a Group M, for example, to evangelize along with them what they could do with technology and what they could do with some of the Google products and services for their clients, right? So how can they use some of Google's products to better market the brands that they worked with? And then naturally, at some point, that then led me to my time at Amazon, where I actually started on the mobile shopping organization, driving marketing to bring in consumers. And a lot of the work I'd done at Google was also on the mobile platform, so it felt like sort of an automatic fit. But once I was at Amazon, it was very interesting in that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars at that point acquiring consumers onto the platform. But once consumers came to the platform, particularly in some of the marketplaces that I worked in, it was very transactional, and we would tend to lose a lot of consumers over time. There was a significant amount of churn. And so I then had to start thinking about, why that was happening and how do I think about the product and how do I build engaging experiences on the product, right? On the platform so that people continue to stay and engage with us. And so that naturally at some point led me to take on product management and start leading product organizations as well. And then in the last decade, I've then gone on to lead product design, engineering, and a bunch of different related functions, particularly because Amazon has had single-threaded organizations that allowed you to do that. And, so at this point today, I feel like I just deeply understand all of the different functions that go in to making a product successful, as opposed to taking a very siloed approach to thinking about how you build, a product to make it successful as a product management org versus just more holistically.
Yeah, but also a product manager can't really build anything without a team.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things I actually like about marketers turning to product is that they have an appreciation for the full life cycle of the user. So where they are now accountable for the experience end to end, not just the signing up part and cost per acquisition. It's truly what's happening and what's the recurrency. And especially in your case, as you also start expanding your scope into design and engineering, I believe that can give you a full perspective. And that is similar to what I've seen with some product executives that we hosted on the podcast. There are very few pure breed product managers that started their career in product. They all kind of use different elements of their career to then combine it into what they are today, which is a product executive.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I also really like working with people who come from sort of that marketing background and then go into product. I think what is interesting is you then start to focus a lot more on outcomes versus output. And what I mean by that is the outcome at the end of the day is, did I build a product that millions of consumers used and truly felt satisfied by it, versus did I say I launched X features and took them to market, right? And so, yeah, I totally agree with you.
I love that part of output versus outcome. I've had so many conversations especially with marketers that have less appreciation for product, where their goal is to launch something. And for a lot of good PMs, in my opinion, it's about launching something with success and like analyzing really what is happening with the people using it, not just if enough people showed up to the party.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in your case, I mean, I see you had different even general manager positions at Amazon. One of them is as a general manager of global price perception. So what is that?
Yeah, pricing plays such an important role in the e-commerce world. And if you look at the Amazon, flywheel, which is this kind of sketch that became really popular over time, pricing is one of the components within that flywheel, right? And so if we don't offer good prices to our consumers, eventually will consumers keep coming back to the platform and stay loyal to you? It becomes a pretty key, input factor that you need to make sure you're doing well around. And my role, I was part of the pricing organization for the e-commerce business globally at Amazon. And my role there was interesting in that there were two components to the role. I worked on the team that built the products and the strategy associated with competitive, monitoring and understanding how do we think about what Walmart is doing versus what Rakuten is doing and what all of the different competitors worldwide look like, right? And then how do you take that into account when deciding how to price a particular product? Because that is an important factor to stay competitive, because consumers in the e-commerce world, when they're buying things like, I don't know, toilet paper roll or, basic things that don't cost a whole amount, versus when you're trying to go buy a phone that costs, let's say, over $100, you think about pricing differently, right? And you are willing to move across platforms to get a good price. And so that was one component of the role. How do you make sure that you are competitive? And then the other component of the role was trying to think about something like, from a consumer's perspective, how do you show up as a competitively priced e-commerce player, right? And what I mean by that is there are two different things, because as a consumer, you may or may not be aware of what Walmart is doing, but I might just look at a particular price and say, oh, $10 seems too high. And I might have no logic as to why I'm saying that. There is a certain untold threshold in my head for how much I would pay for a certain product, right? And so the role there was ensuring that we're competitive mathematically speaking, but that we're also building out the experiences and the user experience in a way that you are perceiving us as being competitive as a consumer.
So what are some of those experiences that make an Amazon user perceive the pricing as competitive?
So, it's fascinating, and we had to do a lot of research to even understand how consumers look at price and evaluate things, right? But for example, having strike-through pricing on the platform, right? And having the user experience that shows that, hey, by the way, the price associated with this product was $30 and it's now $25. Or having an experience that says this is the lowest price in the last 30 days. Or saying something to the effect of, here is a deal and it's going to be running out within the next X hours, right? I think those aspects of how you actually show the price, as well as where in the journey does price come up. So sometimes it could just be that I am searching for a product. I'm looking for tomato ketchup on the platform. And you will see that because Amazon has so many different sellers available, a whole bunch of search results show up, right? And so Amazon Choice as a program is an interesting way of highlighting that here's a particular product that we, the Amazon as a company recommended, for instance, right? And so how do you make sure that the systems are working in the right way, that pricing is taken into account? So there's a lot of things that are externally visible and things that may not be externally visible that go into making sure that pricing is taken into account.
And let's talk about reviews. That's another big part of how it influences pricing. Was there any particular kind of aha moment or minimum number of reviews that you needed for a product to have in order to qualify as being featured on the website?
Yeah, I am at this point because Amazon's a really large organization that is a separate organization that we sort of worked with. So I want to make sure I'm not talking for somebody else while I speak. But very, very broadly speaking, right, it does matter what people are saying from a pricing standpoint as far as the review goes. It does matter how many reviews are on the platform. It also matters, is a particular product a bestseller or not, which again goes back to how many purchases were made and how many reviews were written. So it is an important factor that is taken into account. But I want to make sure I'm not revealing something that's not in my.
Obviously, I mean, I can imagine like pricing. You're basically talking about pricing as a product for a company of scale of Amazon. It makes a lot of sense. Now I'm thinking for smaller companies where pricing is still critical, but there is no full-time pricing expert on the team. Who do you usually think that takes that on? Is it the product team? Is it the marketing team? Is it data?
I think that's really, really fascinating. And I'd say, as a question, and I'd say, it really depends. So if you are talking about an organization that has the scale of products that an e-commerce player might have, then my strategy or approach would look very different from an organization that sells 10 different types of products, right? Because then you are not, then it's more about getting the price point right and what is my pricing and my product positioning strategy, as opposed to, hey, I have millions of products on the platform and prices are changing rapidly every hour, and how do I get my pricing strategy right? So it would really depend on the size as well as the space that those companies are operating in, right? But if for a second we assume that this is a small or medium sized business in something like the e-commerce world, then I would say that something that's at the intersection of product and data would be my answer, as opposed to marketing, because you need to be able to do this at scale and you need to be able to do this programmatically. Because you're not sitting over there and coming up with a product positioning and pricing strategy for every product. You're actually saying, what are the systems I need to have in place for me to have all of the right inputs? And when you're talking about pricing, you need to consider what the MSRP, I think it's called, right? Like the standard price of a product looks like. You need to understand, is this sold offline as well as online? And if it's sold offline, what is it being sold at? You need to take into consideration, is it going to cost me anything to ship this product, and am I going to charge the consumer for it? You need to take into consideration, I might be delivering it to the consumer in one day versus my competitor delivers it over 5 days. So then am I allowed to charge a little bit more for that versus the competitor? So when so many different inputs are going into deciding the price, and you have a permutation and combination of millions of products involved, it has to happen programmatically.
I agree. And I've seen, fortunately, more and more product functions own pricing just because a critical part of the strategy. I believe in the past it was more of a marketing thing or founder thing. Now there is more science to that, and there has to be real connection with other pieces. We're seeing more and more PMs being more focused on the go-to-market in general, and pricing plays a key part of it.
Yeah, and I think that, what I find really fascinating in that space is also how AI plays a big role now, right? Because, or machine learning more broadly, because you are predicting prices a lot of times. So we don't live in an ideal world. There are, as you get into the intricacies of it, you realize that we don't live in an ideal world where we have all of the information we would like, right? So for example, the competitor may not be carrying the product that you are wanting to price, so they don't have the exact same version of the product. But as a consumer, let's say I'm looking to buy a toothbrush, I may not be wedded to the brand, so you may not have the exact same product available, but you may have a certain version of that product available at the competitors end. The catalogs are fairly challenging as well. Not all of the catalogs have the images, so then the systems don't know whether this is are we comparing the right products or not. And so for challenges of that sort, I feel like machine learning really jumps in to fill a lot of gaps, and you are able to predict and set sort of these, like starting and end points of what is the maximum price you would go with for a particular product, and a lot of that is predictive analytics.
Another product that you ran at Amazon was Prime Video. You were the general manager there, and you are still talk about AI. I'm very curious to know what type of AI or machine learning you were using there, because that basically happened before Gen AI was mainstream, right?
Yes, this is really, it's really interesting. I didn't spend a whole bunch of time at Prime Video. This was towards the end of my time at Amazon. So I spent about a year in that organization. But what I was doing was I was building out the product and engineering organization to drive marketing technology for Prime Video, right? And marketing technology plays a really big role in for all of the streaming services, because at the end of the day, consumers come there for the content, right? And you're marketing the content to them, and then you want to give them multiple reasons to keep coming back to you. So there's a whole, it has its own flywheel in terms of how it works. And one of my key goals over there was to make sure that we were marketing in a way that it was one-to-one marketing, right? We talk about it a lot right now in the age of generative AI, where we're saying, hey, it's a segment of one, right? Like, I understand you so deeply, and there could be millions of you that I'm marketing to, but I know exactly what to say to you at the right place at the right time, which is really what we were trying to do at the time. And so I often look back and almost chuckle, because I feel like we tried to do generative AI before generative AI really happened in the world. And a lot of what we were trying to do then might be quite easily possible today. As an example, if I truly wanted to market, to you differently from how I would market to me, right? And I'm really talking to both of us about the same movie that is going to be streamed on Prime Video, then I want to show you a different trailer from what I'm able to see. Or, for example, if you are let's say somebody is in Spain versus someone else is in Singapore, right? They may be associating different languages. The movie may be available in different languages. So how do I use technology to be able to come up with so many different creative versions of both static images as well as videos that would make sense? And I wanted all of this to happen programmatically, right? So how do I use artificial intelligence to enable that?
You're right. Like, a lot of these techniques have been around for a while. It's just that now there is another technological leap that is allowing to push the boundaries even more and personalize experiences to a level that maybe it wasn't possible, or it was possible, but it would require a lot of effort from a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, I truly believe, I know that this is such a debate. I was at a dinner about AI, specifically a couple of weeks ago, and the biggest debate we had was around, is AI going to replace roles, or is it going to supplement roles, right? Which is what everybody's talking about. But I really feel like, from my experience of working across content, which is what generative AI mostly is touching in big ways, right? Is that it's actually just creating space for people to become a lot more creative and to generate more volume than we were able to. And at least so far, it's really working on the low level tasks that we want to free people away from, so that they can then go focus on the high value tasks and really use their brain a lot more than tasks allowed them to in the past.
Another interesting fact about you at Amazon is how you helped the company expand into India by acquiring over 50 million active mobile users in 3 years. So, love for you to tell us more about how.
Yeah, this is one of I love talking about this, because if, till date, when people ask me my favorite role in my career, I always say this was it. And I've not been able to top it since then, in terms of just the opportunity, complexity, and impact in some ways. I really feel like it happens, once in a while, that you get to work on a market that was erupting the way that India was at the time. And this is quite a few years ago, probably, about a decade, a little over a decade ago, that we were, as part of the internationalization team in within Amazon, right? And we were looking to launch Amazon in India at the time, and we were going into a market that was very different from any of the other markets that Amazon had operated and succeeded in. If you look at it broadly, Amazon was really big in the US, and then Europe was a really big arm, and Japan was a big market as well. But all of these markets are fairly evolved marketplaces, right? And they are developed countries, if you will, for most part, barring a few parts of a few countries in Europe. And so coming into India was a very different experience. And I'm Indian. I'm originally from there. I was hired in the Indian market, so it was interesting for me to come in and then also sort of think about how Amazon thinks about their internationalization playbook broadly, and then truly understand the consumer and say, does that playbook really make sense, or should we be doing things differently, right? And the more and more we used user research and consumer understanding in such a huge way in that market, and we learned some really, really interesting things, right? For example, the consumer in India is mobile first as a consumer, right? And the US didn't really have that journey. And so at the time, the focus on building mobile first experiences was very specific to India. The second was that a lot of these users literally just get introduced to the internet through their mobile phones. So they're kind of beginners on their internet journey, right? And you're trying to get them to now make purchases online. The third piece was most consumers were used to a cash economy, so they don't make digital payments, and the trust around making digital payments was very low. And then the fourth thing was they tend to go offline and buy products in a store, right? And they're used to having sales people around them helping them decide what to buy, and everything was driven by conversation. So really thinking about it across all of these dimensions to say, now what product or experience would we build that makes sense for this consumer as opposed to a evolved, developed marketplace consumer that buys online, right? And so there were a lot of things that we did very differently in that marketplace. Our incentivization strategy looked very different. Our pricing strategy looked different. Our, as an example, the Amazon app that is built for the US platform is a 70 MB app, roughly. I can't remember the exact number, but something like 70 MB. In India, it would keep circling in the Play Store because you're not able to download the app of that size. And then people are on sub 4GB devices. And so they only have spots for like 17 apps, and they're not going to spend on a 70 MB app. And so we ended up launching a 2 MB app that was very specific to that marketplace that may not be relevant in the US, right? So there's I really just enjoyed that role in particular because we did so many things that were unique. We were not able to predict how fast the market would grow. And, year on year, suddenly you were adding 100 million mobile users for the first time on the platform, right? As a country. And then now how does Amazon ride that wave and what do we do with it?
That's absolutely incredible. And I feel like in a way, Amazon, we also had guests from Netflix and Spotify who led internationalization of their products to Southeast Asia, really paved the way because showed us what real localization of a product is all about. I think from the outside, it feels like, well, we just need to translate the website and maybe change the currency. But there's so many nuances that go into making something successful at a different region.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of thinking about it not as translation or adaptation and thinking about it as creation of something in a new market, right? And changing that mindset changes everything in how you approach it.
I also think in the US in general, saying going international means going outside the US. But I know both international.
Just one country, right? It's not. It's and for example, it was. Oh, I always found this fascinating, but we referred to India as a country of countries because you have 26 languages spoken. You have all types of social and economic factors that go in across the geography. So, like to your point, you have to treat it. We really have to it would be amazing to get to a world where we use the segment of one concept globally as opposed to just all of internationalization as one segment.
And just switching gears to continue your journey, and you became the chief product officer at Lonely Planet. Want to learn more about what is the difference between a chief product officer and a general manager?
Yeah, so many things changed for me when I made that switch because I'd also gone from, spending a very large amount of time over a decade at large tech companies to go to a smaller organization and then a privately owned organization that was backed by private equity. So all of the dynamics there were very different. But I will say, I think a general managerial role to me is when you are thinking about the holistic aspect of a particular business, right? Especially, and I feel like the GM roles are more relevant to large organizations where you it makes sense to have somebody focused on a particular part of the business and think end to end about how to make that successful and own all of the different functions that go with it, right? So you may be a product led leader who your primary area of expertise might be product management, but you also own engineering and you own design and you own marketing and other things that need to come together in order to make a particular part of that business successful, right? And you're thinking about everything from user growth to then the impact on revenue and so on and so forth. Versus, I think coming into Lonely Planet, the role was structured to report and work with the CEO of the Lonely Planet business to figure out what our product and design strategy should look like. But even more than that, to figure out how do you take a physical books business that has seen a certain amount of success and is doing reasonably well, but is growing, not at the rate that I can't take just a physical books business and say, how do I 10x this business, right? For me, that 10x growth has to come with the digital story. So how do you come into this organization and help them transform their way of thinking to go from a physically oriented business to a digital business? What sort of business model will make sense, right? What is the consumer proposition that makes sense? How do I even figure out what is it that the consumer would be willing to pay for? And when I say that, for instance, Lonely Planet as a business, as a physical business, people are paying to buy a book and read the content. Now, if I just simply created the same version online, I don't think people will be willing to pay for content, right? Because we're used to reading things for free. And so, like, really, truly thinking about how you digitize this business and drive 10x growth was what this role in particular was about.
I was just looking up when Lonely Planet was born. It says 1973. Of
Yeah.
course, no, we weren't there at that time, but it's true that it's a company that wasn't digital first when it was born. So for you as an executive that joins obviously later in their journey, how was that experience for you of transforming an organization that has been successful in a different environment to now make them thrive as the incredible digital platform that it is today?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and what Lonely Planet was all of those years ago to now looks very different, but also they've had their own journey. So it like Lonely Planet switched hands quite a few times. BBC used to own them, and then there was another interim owner, and then eventually Red Ventures, which is now their parent company, bought them. So I also feel like when I joined them, this was our first true attempt where we had the backing of a large company and the investments needed to really drive digitization, right? So it was I think everybody acknowledged that opportunity that was staring us in some ways, but then we also had to contend with the fact that we hadn't really we hadn't ridden the digitization wave that happened between 2010 and 2020, and so you're kind of running a little bit late on it. And how do you now make up for that lost time and yet try to build something? So there are a lot of different something meaningful, right? So there were a lot of different things at play there, and I think for me that there were three specific challenges, right? Number one, there was to your point, there was an organization that was focused on content and that was focused on selling through offline sources a certain way, and they had done that successfully, so they were wedded to doing things that way. So how do I get them to see that there could be a different way of doing things? I think the second piece was, how do you work with people who are primarily from the media world? I was the only person that had a technology background. Everybody else that I worked with were very successful people who had built successful careers in the media industry, right? And then the third piece was, there was a parent company that had seen success in a certain way, and there were private equity investors associated with the business, and they see things a certain way. So how do you now get them to see the importance of investing in building out a product for at least the first couple of years in a way that they may have never done before, right? So those were sort of all of the challenges. And I think what when I first started, the first thing that I focused on was, how do I first get to a common definition of what is digital transformation? And it was really funny because everybody I asked had a different answer to the question. And so I think that was like my moment where I was like, okay, my task here is cut out, right? In what I needed to do first.
The word data transformation has been overused, that it lost its meaning in many ways. And we do a lot of training for large organizations that are going through data transformation. Funny thing is, even the transformation implies that it's a project, like you go and transform. But to me, as a product person, it's something that it never really ends, and it has to require constant improvement. That was one thing that I think shocked me when I started talking with very successful leaders, that they just were successful in a very different environment. But I noticed that a lot of these companies also struggle with acquiring digital talent, like you, because yes, they want to be digital powerhouses. They want to compete with Amazon and Google, but people that work at Amazon and Google don't want to work at those companies. So upskilling seems to be a really important part of it for those organizations. So I'm curious to know how, when you joined, which first of all is a huge win for a company like Lonely Planet, how were you able to meet them where they were and work with their existing talent to show them a way to go into the direction that you thought was going to be better for the long term?
Yeah, it was, I have to say, Carlos, if I had to answer that question, honestly, it was definitely challenging, right? My first few months of being there was challenging for me as a person, because it was not only meeting them where they were, but it was also asking myself, how am I going to operate in a place that was very different from what I was used to? And I think my first sort of aha moment was realizing that what made me successful there is not going to make me successful here necessarily, right? And like what got me to that point there is not going to get me to where I want to get to here. And I think it was a very humbling moment to have that moment of realization. I think the second piece was, I really had to learn to treat my three sets of stakeholders very differently from each other. The team that I was taking on and the larger organization, I think, was really about thinking about how do you create psychological safety within an organization where it feels like technology is going to replace my job. Are you just going to use AI to build content, and so do you not need editors anymore? What does my role look like, right? And so I think we contended with a lot of that, and you really needed emotional intelligence to be able to deal with something like that. It was not anymore at a place like Amazon, because we all think similarly. All I need is customer data to help you understand why we need to do something, right? But in a place like this, I really felt like I needed to use my emotional literacy and intelligence to deal with people better, and it's not just data, it's data, intuition, and people coming together, right? Which was a very, very interesting thing. Because we know in technology that you fail and you learn and then you build the right product, but that wasn't always a given thing there.
Exactly. I was just smiling because, as to me, I consider myself a digital person. Like, these concepts come natural, right? Very fast. Yeah, great. Let's use Gen AI to automate everything. Yeah, it's great. But like, there's a lot of people that they have different mental models because they work for them. So finding ways to bring them along the journey. I think that analogy of the mountain, like being the Sherpa, instead of just climbing fast and saying, I'm here, I think resonates with me.
Yeah, and I think that was, like you were talking about why would somebody go from a large company to some of these, smaller outfits. And I think I would say I learned so much at Amazon about, like, I'm so grateful that that's the school of product that I grew up in. But then at Lonely Planet, I think taught me a ton about emotional intelligence and about the value of people, and how do you take, like, we will all go farther together, right? And at some point you will hit a ceiling if you only focus on data and say, I don't care about whether you are on board or not, right? And so I think I value that experience a lot as a leader, to learn how to take people along.
I notice a pattern across your experience at Lonely Planet and Amazon, which is content. You create or led content teams for Kindle, for Prime Video, for Lonely Planet guides. So, what is the value of the intersection between content and product?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I do think that I've always had a inherently chose roles that involved content. I find content really fascinating and interesting, and if you think about what content does at the end of the day, content is just telling you a story, right? Whether that was reading books on Kindle, or it's watching a movie on Prime Video, or it's learning about travel through Lonely Planet, right? And I think that, but what is fascinating is, think about content in isolation. They tell you a story and that's about it, right? But then think about it as the intersection of product and content. Kindle, where somebody was trying to learn a piece of content, or in Kindle we built education experiences, right, where people would even use it for test prep. How do you build features within the platform that allow you to use the content and make notes, and use make them actionable at the end of the day, so you can use it to do something eventually? Or it could be something like short form content, where you're reading short pieces of content and wanting to store them, save them, share them, so on and so forth. Or it could be at Lonely Planet, you're reading an amazing article about going hiking, I don't know, hiking the Machu Picchu, for example, right? What do you do with that? And can I make that content really actionable so you can add it to your itinerary and start planning a trip to Peru, for instance? Can I do it in a way where you see a beautiful image, and it's, let's say it's a beautiful image of a coffee shop somewhere. Can I tell you that image, can the image be tagged with the location and the point of interest? And can I get you to add this to your itinerary? And then can I tell you on which day and at which location does it make sense for you to add the coffee shop in? Right. So to me, that was what was most fascinating about both making the content beautiful as an experience, but also actionable.
What I understand is enriching the content so it's integrated with other things that that user can do, such as creating their own guide, booking a hotel, or taking that movie experience to do something else. Now, here is where I struggle. Like in the new era where we are all connected to like short videos on TikTok or Instagram, YouTube, you name it, where the attention span is getting shorter. Like, how do you go about really creating those incredible experiences in content formats that have been traditionally longer form? Yeah, and I think that is exactly what has been challenging, or like an interesting challenge to tackle in the content space. And the way I think about it is, at the end of the day, you're still telling the same story, right? So, like, my framework doesn't change. The quality of content doesn't change, the bar for the quality of content. But the way I look at it is, I'm now dealing with a range of people across age, let's say, particularly, right? Somebody that is a older millennial, or even much older than that, tended to be our Lonely Planet audience, and they really liked and enjoyed reading long form content. But then when you start building for the newer audience, the attention span is much lower. So the way that we think about it is modularizing content, right? So you instead of thinking about it as, here's a large article, think about the article broken into multiple pieces, which are points of interest. It's almost like all of the ingredients needed to make a recipe.
and you could just use one ingredient on its own, or you could mix them up differently to create different dishes, right? I think about content like that you modularize all of the content and create components of content available, and then you put them together in a way that makes sense. So now I could use generative AI to look through a large article. So for example, you could use a large language model and you could build something on top of that to use your own very specific content that's available on the platform, and you could convert a piece of content into an itinerary, right? That is really easy to digest and use. You could convert an itinerary into a video where someone in 1 minute is explaining to you what your trip is going to involve. So to me, that's what's going to be fascinating about where we go with content, right? You modularize it and then you put it together in a way that works for the consumer, as opposed to getting wedded to formats.
That's exactly what we're trying to do with a podcast like this one. Like we from here will extract like multiple modules with
Yeah.
the highlights of some of your answers, and will allow people to pick their own adventure. There are people who will still enjoy to listen to the whole thing and maybe even watch this interview on YouTube. There are other people who just prefer to listen while they're in the car, and there will be people who just want the 3 short clips to get the TLDR, and that's all good.
Right, and you don't have to make. I love that example, because you don't have to make the decision for the user. You just offer them options, and they can choose what works for them.
Another thing, and I find really interesting in your own background. You have so many different things I could pull, but it's the fact that Lonely Planet is Lonely Planet's parent company is heavily invested by 2 private equity firms, and I heard Jeff Bezos talk about how Amazon famously reinvests most of the profit and stays barely, break even. So, private equity is a different beast. So as a product executive, I'm curious about how the different shareholders of an organization influence how you go about building your product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was like the thing that was the most different for me to contend with, is that at Amazon, the customer is everything. We have all of the time in the world to do right by the consumer, if it even meant not making money for the first several quarters, right? That was the way the company thought. And that is not how the media industry or private equity backed organizations, and I don't talk for private equity broadly, but from the little exposure that I've had to that world, I think that the question around how you make money and when you make money comes a lot faster than it comes in the tech world or in the product world, where a lot of even VC-backed companies are talking about growth and potential for growth, right? Versus in the world that I was exposed to, it was about how do you execute all of this, and when are you going to make money? And I don't want you to have a large plan for how to get from zero to where you want to get to and then start thinking about making money. I want you to start thinking about making money once you get to the MVP stage. And that's kind of the orientation over there, and that was difficult, definitely a difficult change for me to get behind. And so I feel like there was a significant amount of negotiation where you're trying to think about how can I be creative to deliver things faster, but how can I also keep the organization honest toward doing what is right by the consumer, and that we don't make decisions that are about short-term money and we end up sacrificing the long-term good, right? So it was a constant process over there. How do you balance those 2 factors? And I learned a lot about, failing fast, failing cheap. This is not something that Amazon necessarily, we talked about failing fast, but you had all of the resources and the money, and it's a large company, right? Versus when you go to a smaller organization, you are forced to fail quicker, right? And get those learnings quickly. So velocity is really important. But how do you drive that velocity without sacrificing quality and long-term good? So I think that was at the constant tension across these 3 areas.
Priyanka, it's been a pleasure to spend this time and learn from your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Carla. It's a lovely, lovely conversation.